Welcome to Taiwan Context. This is the show where we go a little bit more in depth into certain topics related to Taiwan. And today I have with me in studio Albert Chiu, Associate Professor in the Political Science Department at Tunghai University. He studied legislative studies and, after being educated in the U.S., likes to apply lessons learned there to local politics. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Donovan. Hi, friends and audiences. It's my pleasure to be in the show.
Yeah, so today we will be discussing the recent past, present, and future of the KMT and KMT Chairman Johnny Chiang. Johnny Chiang reigned for party chair after Wu Duanyi stepped down after the KMT's defeat in January. Now, Johnny Chiang is a legislator from Taichung's Fengyuan district.
Mm-hmm.
He was elected both in 2016 and this year reelected by really large margins. So he's very popular locally. And he, as the chair, has been trying to reform the party. Now, I have met Johnny Chiang, but you actually know him, don't you?
Right. I actually know him personally. I can say that he's a likable and a decent person. I mean, as an ordinary Taiwanese as anybody else, right?
Yeah. Now, I met him. He seems very likable and more practical than ideological, it was my take.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, Johnny, he was raised in Fengyuan. Actually, some people had a misguided image about him by saying that he's from a wealthy family. But I can tell you the truth is that is not the case, because he was born in Fengyuan in a farmer's family, and his grandpa was a smart kind of a local leader. He ran a business for agricultural machinery, and so he was successful for that. And he ran for politics and was actually one of the village leader. So he was that. So Johnny is a grandson of the successful businessman locally, and he kind of learned how to become kind of immerse himself in politics. So that's his how he started his first career in kind of learn what politics is and things like that. And after that, he went to Taichung Yizhong, the best high school in Taichung, and went to Zhengda University and learning IR. And he went to the United States, the University of South Carolina, specifically in the area of international relations. And he came back to Taiwan in Suzhou University, was as a professor like me in Suzhou University in the Department of Political Science. So if you go over Johnny's whole life, he's not that type of wealthy person that's out of touch with the local people. So, that probably explains why he's pragmatic and not so idealistic, or kind of talking in the interest of those wealthy people.
Here's something actually that I looked into and I tried to find an answer to, but I couldn't. I looked online, and because the Fengyuan district historically was Hakka. And his family's been in Taiwan for hundreds of years. Is he Hakka or is he Taiwanese?
No, he's the Hakka. I mean, he's very, purely just Taiwanese from a Taiwanese family.
Oh, okay. Because I couldn't find any references. The
Right.
period he came over, the area was heavily Hakka when
Right.
his family came over.
Sure.
So
for example, Dongshi is typically a Hakka town, right?
Yeah.
Where Hakka people maybe out of stereotype, or maybe more or less true about it, is that Hakka people are kind of reject or refuse to change, in as opposed to other ethnicity. But maybe this is just stereotype. So in people around that area, Johnny was popular because he knew the practical needs of those people. He sort of like aimed at solving local problems, instead of providing a lot of slogans. Because people in that area, some of them they are doing agriculture, others have the small business, so they don't need a lot of talks. They need something can be done. So Johnny, I think, like what I said in the beginning, he grew up in a farm, and he was himself had to go to the farm every day and to help his father and grandfather to to plant and to grasp those fruits. So he knew what those people need. So, but Johnny, like what I said, he's definitely the Taiwanese people.
Okay. I mean, because when I spoke to him, he definitely is very knowledgeable. We spoke at length. I think we spoke for about 30 minutes, and about 20 minutes of that was transport policy in Taichung City. And he knew what he was talking about, which was good. Now he's associated with the Red faction. Now, when a lot of people think of the political factions, they think of people like Yanching Gaos, and there's association with corruption and violence and these sort of things. But there's been nothing that I've ever seen that Johnny Chiang is associated with any of that. Although obviously he knows these people, but as far as I've seen, he hasn't had any. He hasn't been involved in anything like that. Is there anything that you're aware of?
Right. Well, actually, the symbolic leader of the Red faction is Liao Liaoyi, the former, Taichung magistrates, the mayor, right?
Yeah.
And he was one of that. And the reason why Johnny jumped in politics was because of there was a legislator. He retired, and he kind of cannot find anybody to kind of take over his position. So he went to Liao Liaoyi by asking, who is around, young people, maybe well educated, at the best, from United States or kind of learn something from the Western societies. So Liao Liaoyi recalled that there's a young people, which Johnny Liao Liaoyi did not know him at all. So he kind of recalled there's a vaguely there's a guy out there.
Yeah.
So he mentioned Johnny, and that is why that was the very first chance that Johnny jumped into politics and became a leader for the journalism, the bureau in the central governments, right?
The GIO, the Government Information Office. Yeah.
Yes, the Government Information Office. So that was his very first job in politics, right? So if you talk to Johnny by asking if you belong to Red faction, he will tell you that this is such a misunderstanding because he does not know his personal link to the faction. So that is why people make link between Liao Liaoyi and him, and that was why. That was kind of coincidence, sort of.
Oh, okay. So he didn't grow up with it.
No, not
like
grow up
with it,
or like
that.
in not even physically related.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, because I was wondering about that. I mean, Yan Quanhong obviously is Yanching Gaos' son.
Right. Yeah.
So okay, so he has kind of a loose connection to the Red faction.
Very loose.
Very loose. Okay. All right. So let's move on a little bit here to now when he was running for party chair. Can you tell us some of the things that he was running on, some of the points he was making about the KMT, why he wanted to reform? Now, what happened was Wu Dunyi basically led the party into a disastrous defeat in January. The second national defeat on this scale in a row for the party. So when Johnny Chiang ran, he had some new and fresh ideas. Can you tell us a little bit about what your perspective on that was?
In January 2020, when KMT suffered from the electoral defeats, big time. So there were a lot of reflection, as every time in the past, that the chairman should step down. So a lot of pressure on Wu Dunyi, and Wu Dunyi finally succumbed and he resigned. So a lot of voices abound at that time, and people encouraged Johnny to jump in the election. While on the other hand, the former Taipei City Mayor Hao Longbin, he was interested in the position as well. So it ends up that two candidates jump in the arena and fighting against each other. And why the reason why Johnny finally won the election was because, first of all, he was relatively young, 48 years old, and well-educated, which even though Hao Longbin, he was educated in the United States as well, but Johnny was like in relatively he was younger, right? And also Johnny's arguments about the KMT's future and how KMT should continue to reform and should find a right direction is more appealing to, I won't say younger party members because there are few.
Yes, but as he pointed out when he was running, that 3% of the party is under the age of 40.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty miserable. But to the mainstream party members, maybe they are 40s, 50s, even 60s.
Or older.
They are, I mean, still older, but they like the fresh flavor of him.
Yeah.
They would like to have a new face from within the party, right? So Johnny kind of fit in that position. So that is why he won the election. But it is worth noting that the turnout rates of the election was very low. It was about not even 30%. So in political science, when we say that the way when a leader is elected is subject or limited to a low turnout, that means the legitimacy of his qualification is still limited. So that was one of the biggest kind of challenges Johnny faced in the very first place. So he has to work hard and to show the external world as well as the party members that he can and he will be doing something real, right? So that's kind of the context that where he was in the very first place.
So now I found I got two questions on this. One is I found it very interesting that he won by a fairly large margin against someone who's associated with the mainlander, or the so-called mainlander elites. Hao Longbin is from an old school. He's the son of the ex-premier. He's more associated, I would assume, with the Huang Fuxing military veterans group, which is very powerful in the KMT and has strong ties with China and the old school KMT. Why do you think that? Do you think that why Hao Longbin lost has a lot to do with how poor of a candidate he was? Yeah, I'm surprised that the Huang Fuxing and the old school
did not work that time, right?
Yeah, they didn't come out in force for their guy.
Yeah, well, this is sort of a misunderstanding. Like in your question, you guys, or like people like you, or ordinary outsiders, they would assume that KMT is greatly manipulated by the deep, blue kind of factions, which is true in some senses or in some occasions, but not true in others. In terms of the the chairman election, people, they have a clear understanding that who is kind of in the position of the right direction, right? So they kind of look up to whoever is in rising at that point of time, especially that's in the aftermath of the electoral defeats. So they knew that the Huang Fuxing faction, the way they worked and the arguments that are provided for the mainstream society is not gonna work, anymore. So they need a mainstream type of candidates. So even though emotionally they would like still to choose Hao Longbin as their preference, but practically they knew that this is not gonna work. And the reason I said this is because Johnny's victory in that election pretty much repeated Ma Ying-jeou's experience. Because don't ever forget that Ma Ying-jeou, when he rised in the very first place as a Taipei mayor,
or even before that, when he was justice minister.
Just the ministers.
Yeah.
His arguments was pretty new to those older people. They did not like him that much because the way he performed, even though we have a lot of criticism against him afterwards. But think about, back to when, that was a long time ago, he was pretty a new brand to those kind of establishment. So finally he kind of win in a final battle. And jump to the center of the party stage.
Yeah. I remember Ma Ying-jeou early on when he was justice minister. He had a reputation for being fairly clean and he took his job sort of seriously. And then they moved him out of the way because he was offending people by upsetting some apple carts. But now the other thing that I wanted to ask about him running for chair is what's interesting is the big heavyweights in the party avoided that one. Now, in part, probably because it was finishing a term. So I think a lot of people view Johnny Chiang's tenure of being basically a caretaker. And we're going to get back a little bit later into the show about the heavyweights that may be running next time around. But the period when Johnny Chiang took over, the party was in a mess. It was a disaster at that point. Yeah. I mean, it was a disastrous electoral defeat following the national one in 2016. Their finances are a mess. And so, how much do you think that the reason why a lot of these heavyweights step back is just simply because, and I actually saw quotes from some of the party heavyweights that basically, right now it's a disaster. We don't want to touch this. Um, how much do you think that played into his winning? Because the KMT really was in a bad spot, and to a certain degree still is. Do you think that played a big role in his election?
I think, like having said that Johnny was pretty good in terms of his own career development as well as his performance in legislative union. I mean, in relative sense, even though, people from the DPP side don't like him, but TPP from the, people from the DPP side, for example, Wang Dingyu, legislator Wang Dingyu, in the beginning, actually approved Jiang Qishan as well, even though he did have some kind of criticism afterwards. But to say that, having said that, I still have to kind of come back to the normal life now. The party reform and also a lot of burdens and troubles and a lot of messy stuff within DPP, like what you suggested, is really cumbersome. It's nasty. I mean, it's not easy to change for many reasons. First of all, there are a lot of vested interest in it. They knew that the boats, so to speaking, is sinking.
Yeah.
That the boats of the KMT is sinking.
The way that they would always put it, and this I saw quotes from several heavyweights, was that this is the lowest point in KMT's history, which I kind of disagreed with. I would have thought that would have been 1949, but that was the one way they used to describe it. This is the lowest point in KMT history.
In recent history, maybe it is.
Yeah.
But actually, as far as I know, that some people they they conducted polling every month, even every week, and also on the other sides of the party spectrum, the people from the DPP they conducted polling as well. There are actually some kind of consensus over there regarding KMT's status right now. Since February 2020 this year, when you say there was a low point for the electoral supports for, or just the party approval of KMT, actually it climbs a little bit, but not more than 30%. To me, it's still really low.
Yeah,
it is low not in relative sense or in absolute sense, but it is low in a sense that they never will win back the regime. They will never win the presidential election anymore, even 4 years after now, right? So that's not enough. But considering how much Johnny has to overcome, within the party, it's really hard. So I can say my kind of evaluation of his performance so far is that he hasn't done enough about reforming the party, specifically the arguments against CCP, the communist China.
Yeah.
And also get rid of those pro-China faction within the party, because there are two types of party in this category. First of all, there were business persons. Those business persons, they might not be so competitive in China, but because they abuse the name of KMT to woo those consumers in China by saying that we are linked to KMT, so that you should make business with us. But that's not about their capability. All right. So those people in Chinese, we call them the business type KMTers.
The comprador.
The comprador, yes.
The compradors, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The other parts, which I did not think was important before, but after I kind of experienced some of the party affairs, I thought that parts of the people really exist. Those people, even though they occupy a very small segment of the population, but they did exist. Those people, they have affection for China.
Yeah,
they did not really appreciate the Western sense of democracy. They did not think that, especially the American model, really works for Chinese people, and they identify themselves as part of the Chinese people instead of Taiwanese people. And we all know that the Taiwanese identity now really serves as a mainstream identity in Taiwan.
Yeah,
and Chinese people maybe less than 20%. But those part of people, where I feel empathy for them, because that's their, maybe from their family experience or maybe from their personal experience. Some of them are married to the Chinese woman or married to Chinese husband. So they do have that kind of link.
Mm-hmm.
So the two parts of the KMTers really kind of pull Jiang Qishan back from, going away from the China identity.
And then there's the ones who aren't they don't do business over there per se. They just are ideologically tied. I mean, Wu Zihuai, he comes to mind,
right?
To a certain degree. Ma Yingzhou,
right?
These guys,
right? So this is really difficult for Jiang Qishan because, well, to be fair, I think even in DPP you see similar situation, kind of outliers out there that kind of trying to pull Taiwan away from the mainstream society.
Mm-hmm.
And so does Jiang Qishan, right? So for those part of the faction, you can say Huang Fuxin Dangbu, or those people who do business in China, or like affectionately tied to China. You can say those people kind of pull Jiang Qishan away from the mainstream Taiwan. So I think the first priority for Jiang Qishan to take care of is to remove those parts, even though my perspective to him is too strong, because he already experienced or encountered backlash from within.
All right, so that's a good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about. Now, he campaigned for KMT chair on being more pro-U.S.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about possibly dropping the 92 consensus, reforming the finances, and appealing more to youth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once he won, he formed a series of reform committees.
Mm-hmm.
And you were on one of these committees.
Mm-hmm.
And you were on the most important one, but you're not a KMT member, are you?
No, I'm not KMT members. To them, I'm just kind of serve outside experts. I do want to kind of say something about myself, is that personally, I don't like KMT that much.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Johnny as a friend, and I admire him. I like him, as a friend. But personally, I don't like KMT and many of their ideas in history, especially regarding their authoritarian past.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the reason I am willing to join the committee is because I think a sound democracy, even some of the friends from the left or from the DPP side, they will agree with me on this notion, is that we need a strong opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And only a strong opposition makes the democracy functions in a normal way. And of course, we do have a lot of different opposition parties, but the de facto is that KMT is still the second biggest party in the Legislative Yuan. And there's a lot of chances for them to come back to the power as the ruling parties in the future.
I'd love to do another show. We talk about all the other parties, right, and their chances going forward, but that's for another show. So, all right. So now I remember when the reforms came out, I did a show about it because I went through all of it, and it actually looked really quite good. Mm-hmm. It seemed to be facing the realities of the challenges. Mm-hmm. The financial part was a little too vague, I thought.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff on attracting youth sounded good on paper, but it was, who knows how that was going to work. Mm-hmm. But of course, you were on the key committee, the cross-straits committee, and your committee recommended, and of course this was backed by Johnny Chiang, to drop the 92 consensus.
Mm-hmm. Well, the phrase or the terminology should have been more precise, or more, with more caveats. This is kind of the arts of politics, is that when you come up with a argument or a reform manifesto, you really have to simultaneously satisfy different parties, right? So the conclusion we had from the committee is, to me, not far enough. Definitely not far enough regarding dump the 92 consensus. Well, actually, the committee was actually, to my perspective, is like still approving 92 consensus.
But as a historical thing.
But as a historical fact. But even that was written down in a very vague sense in the final report. At the
bottom. It was put down way down.
It was put at the bottom.
Yeah.
And so to the old-fashioned politician, for example, Su Qi or other party members, they were Well, Suchi, Professor Suchi. I mean, I personally know him. He's a very nice guy,
Uh-huh.
very humble, modest, and open to different opinions. But don't ever forget that he and the President Ma Ying-jeou, they had their momentum,
Yeah.
in their own ages, right? So
Mhm.
they're kind of stuck in their time. But now it's 2020, and we are going to be 2021 very, very quick. So we have to move on and to find a new balance between Taiwan and China. So to me, the conclusion of the committee was not far enough. But to be fair, there were 5 members in that cross-strait committee, where there were 13 members in total. Were pretty 5 of them, including me, were pretty advanced. We are very progressive, and our arguments and our kind of debates was very productive in the committee. And actually, we are still follow the civilized kind of rule that we respect each other, and we kind of articulate, we kind of say whatever we think is right to say. And in the end, it was a peaceful ending, peaceful conclusion, even though the manifesto that was not written by all of us. It was kind of in the hands of a few people. So for me, because I can say I'm one, perhaps the most progressive member in the committee, which means that my opinions was not taken into consideration a lot. Actually, 99% was not taken into consideration in the final manifesto. But this is why Johnny invited me over to join the committee, because I'm more like serve as a stimulus, kind of a catalyst
Mhm.
for the reform of the party. But anyway, so in the end, we actually had a kind of convention after the committee meetings, where we met up for 2 months in a row, and was intensive, lot of exchange. We even had a line group. Even now it still exists, still kind of inactive though, but we talk to each other, kind of change opinions. But in the conference, I mean in the convention, afterwards, the final version, which is a manifesto, was even new to me, and to me it was more conservative, right? So to be fair, even though I'm friends, one of the friends of Johnny's, I would say that that kind of change in a conservative direction. So then we move on to another stage, which is the party congress,
Mhm.
which I
Well,
personally.
why don't we go into the backlash before we get to the party congress?
Okay.
Because there was a big backlash
Mhm.
out of what the reform committee, and almost all the backlash was
Okay. Yeah,
around the
that's a good
92
point.
consensus.
Right. Speaking of that, actually, I can sincerely fear there is a pause, or there's a pressure on us, not on me personally, because I don't. First of all, I'm not interested in talking to China. That's not my area. My doctoral dissertation has to do with American individualism and participation. So I don't really, seriously, I don't have research interest in China. So I don't have need to go to China in person on a regular basis. But for others, for other members, some of them are just reserved to say you can check out online. They do have business in China. They have a link to China. They have, anyway, they need to earn money in China. So they even say explicitly in a committee, by saying that we have to consider the Chinese communist opinion about our reform. They might not be happy about this, about that. That's one type of person. The other type is, for example, Professor Suchi. He was one of the members. He was concerned with, if we take away the 92 consensus, that might destabilize the cross-strait relations, that might in the end leads up to war, which I tend to disagree, because in 2019, in January, the President Xi Jinping, he obviously explicitly linked the 92 consensus to one country, two systems, so that he basically eradicates the vagueness of the 92 consensus, in that 92 consensus could be linked to the ROC, right? That's the Kuomintang, the KMT's version of the
Mhm.
country, right?
Yeah, it's
So they still had the naive understanding that CCP still subscribe to this notion, which they don't.
they never
E-
did.
even though now a trustworthy resource told me from KMT, which I cannot say whom, but this is really trustworthy. But by saying that they say the communist China, after they experienced the sentiment with KMTers, because there was a convention, right, where KMT Jiang Chiang originally wanted to send a group of party representatives, even including the secretary, over to China to kind of meet up with them, kind of to make up, with each other, right? But there was an anchor from China by saying that, KMT, they come over here because they want to beg us for peace. They succumb or they give in. So that really provoked, not only KMTers but also the whole society of Taiwan by saying that you guys should, it's a dignity problem. You should reserve your dignity. So that in the end, that Jiang Chiang, he withdrew the whole group and refused to go over there anymore. If there are any individual members who is willing to go, that's their decision, that's their choice. Okay, so that's the background. And actually, the trustworthy resource told me that after this instance, China, they back up a little bit, in a sense that they come back to the 92 consensus. And Wang Yang, he is the leader of the Haixiehui. He actually talked about, he removed the parts where Xi Jinping stated that 92 consensus is linked to one country, two system. They don't mention that anymore, even though I repeatedly remind them of the possibility that the Communist Party would cheat it on you again, and that's KMT experience. Whenever they had fights with the Communist Party, always back and forth, and finally the losers is only always the KMT. So I remind them, but that served as a sign to some of the KMTers, in that their route is on the right track, which to me they should still need to be very cautious about it. But I also want to mention this as a notice to people outside KMTs, even from the DPP side. And this is going on right now, and we should kind of study on this, especially the Taiwan administration.
So let me jump back a little bit, just for context for our listeners. The 1992 consensus originally was made up to describe what happened at some meetings in the early 1990s. There was never actually, that was never explicitly mentioned as a thing until the early 2000s. But it was, the formulation on the Chinese side was that there was one China. And the formulation that the KMT accepted was that there was one China, each side with its own interpretation. The Chinese side never accepted that. And then, of course, Xi Jinping came in with one country, two systems, one China, one country, two systems, which the KMT actually came out very quickly and condemned that. But as far as Taiwan dropping the 92 consensus, that effectively happened with that leading to war, is that Taiwan dropped it in 2016. So, Taiwan's been without it for a while now. But when the committee that you were on and Johnny Chiang came out with dropping the 92 consensus going forward, the backlash seemed to be led by, it was Ma Ying-jeou, Su Qi, and what I found very interesting, Han Kuo-yu is one of these opposed to it, is the split between who stepped up and supported Johnny Chiang as KMT chair, although not one of them said anything about the 1992 consensus. So there was a lot of talk about removing Johnny Chiang at the time, I remember, before the party congress in September. And the ones who stood up and the ones who were against him, I thought was a very interesting split. The ones that were against him generally were associated with what were so-called mainlander elites. And the ones that stood up for him were Hoyoi, Zhu Liluan, that's Albert Chiu, and Wang Jinping. Two of those three are Taiwanese, and the other one's half Taiwanese. Now, none of them said anything really about the 92 consensus, but they said, Johnny Chiang's doing a great job. He's working really hard. 他很辛苦 is the way Eric Chiu would put it. So do you have any thoughts on the split between who supported him, who didn't, and how no challenges actually came up to remove him during the party congress?
Okay, first of all, the survival of Johnny, to continue his job as a chairman is to compromise, more or less, right? Compromise to the direction of men and their elites, as you mentioned. But if he compromised too much, he will lose a lot of reformer mindset type of party members and even outsiders, and ordinary
younger voters,
even though there are not many already. So he has to strike a balance between the two powers, kind of two factions.
Yes, you could probably fit all the young KMT supporters into a bus.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, right. So he has to kind of make a strike a balance between the two sides, right? So, and also the second observation that we should have is that the elites you mentioned, Eric Chiu, Han Kuo-yu, even Wang Jinping, even like New Taipei Mayor Hou You-yi and the former New Taipei Mayor Zhou Xiwei, right, and even Ma Ying-jeou, they all have their calculation, right? I mean, who doesn't? Even in DPP, you think about Tsai Ing-wen and also other political elites, they have their own calculation, and so do those people in KMT. But the theme for KMT, to me, the most urgent problem for them is that they even have had a chance to win an election, and they started fights already. It makes sense that you start fight against each other after the win election because the resources are abundant, right? You have a lot of personnel posts. You can assign your own person to be in that position, to be in this position. But given the fact that KMT is such a minority party, right? They are, as a opposition party, they have limited resources. Even the party assets is pretty much deprived or pretty much taken away or pretty much calculated, whatever term you use, by the ruling party. But they still, those old folks, those old politicians, they're still thinking about when and how they can come back to the ruling position. I mean, I'm not a ruling of the country, but a ruling of the party, right?
Yeah. So let's get back to that topic in a minute.
So they have to kind of use Johnny Chiang, the chairman, as a tool, to kind of, first of all, to show how they are thinking of the whole picture, because they do not want to dump Johnny for the second, because they thought Johnny is pretty hardworking and so on and so forth, right? Also, they want to win the support for Johnny because, first of all, some of the candidates, for example, Eric Chiu especially, he is craving for the chairman election next year, May 20, right? So
they moved it to August, actually.
August election.
Yeah, they moved it from
next year.
They moved it from May to
August.
That was at the last party congress. They changed the date.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, August. But it's still, the situation still remains the same. The factional fights will continue even longer, right?
Yes.
If that's the case. Okay. So Eric Chiu, he's craving for that position, and he thought maybe Johnny could be his assistant, right? And Chiu did not actually. Chiu broke up with Hou You-yi, and Hou You-yi was one of his subjects. Right, and Hou You-yi rising really quick and really standing in the center of this party spectrum. Actually, Hou You-yi is one of the most popular, actually the most popular candidates within the KMT, right?
By far,
right? By far. So he is very smart. So Chiu and Hou, they broke up. Xi Jinping is outliers, right? I mean, not Xi Jinping, excuse me, Zhou Xiwei. Sorry. Yeah. Zhou Xiwei. Xi Jinping in the KMT, that would have been a disaster, right? Okay. All right. So Zhou Xiwei is an outsider out there. So he does not really, is not really influential at all. But he can make little splits, right? And, just make you guys, suffer a little bit. So he's out there. And regarding Han Kuo-yu, I think Han Kuo-yu is ambitious about coming back.
So that's actually a little bit of a later topic. So let's get back to that in a minute. Just very quickly, Zhou Xiwei, how is this guy still around and anybody listening to him? He was a one-term Taipei County commissioner.
Right.
His own party bumped him out. I actually saw him on a horse once, and the horse tried to throw him off. Anyway, I've met him a few times. But why is anybody still listening to this guy?
Well, Zhou Xiwei, you can view Zhou Xiwei as a affiliation with Hong Xiuzhu. And Zhou Xiwei himself looked up to Han Kuo-yu.
Right.
And he really admired the pattern of Han Kuo-yu's rising.
Okay.
Right. But Han Kuo-yu did not really view him as an important aid because Zhou Xiwei himself is, is limited. I mean, his utility is very limited right now.
Yeah.
So Zhou Xiwei is kind of out there. And whenever, like in the U.S. presidential election, you always have those kind of
hangers on
over there, right? So he's that type of person.
Because I noticed him during the mayoral election, during the presidential, he was everywhere.
Yes.
And it's like, why are they? This guy was not popular. He didn't do a good job.
Yeah. And don't ever forget that Han Kuo-yu was in the same position in the very first place in the KMT election. Remember? Not until he kind of coming out of nowhere in Kaohsiung in 2018.
Yeah.
So it's the same situation.
So Johnny Chiang, at the end of the day, just before the party Congress, dropped the proposal to drop the 1992 consensus. Now, I saw that there was an internal KMT party poll of their members, which showed, I think it was 82% of the party members still supported the 92 consensus. So it was pretty obvious he wasn't going to get it through the party Congress. Did he have anything to say to you about it, or anything you saw that he said in public about this that you thought was revealing? Or
Johnny, I think he really faced a difficulty of entirely dismissing 92 consensus, because when he does that, he cannot even continue his position as a chairman, right? So like what I said earlier, he has to compromise. Okay, so the number one. Number two, but also on the other hand, we have to specify who is going to go against him, and those people are influential. Because if you have people like Hong Xiuzhu or Zhou Xiwei against him, it doesn't matter to him. But people like Ma Ying-jeou, people like Zhu Lilun, or even people like Han Kuo-yu against him, that will, bring him into trouble. So he has to consider these people, right? So. And for Ma Ying-jeou's perspective, Ma Ying-jeou is a stubborn supporters of 90 consensus, even though that term is not brought up by him.
His legacy kind of depends.
That's his legacy. That's how he identifies himself, how he still continues to feel that he exists in the Taiwan's politics, right? So Ma Ying-jeou is very grumpy about any possibility to remove 92 consensus. So Ma Ying-jeou told Jiang Qishan that you will never, ever do this if you still want my help. My supports. Okay. So I think Jiang Qishan finally came to a action where he come back to the 92 consensus. But if it's still in the original form, that will make people look down to Jiang by saying that you have no change at all. So that is why Jiang Qishan asked Ma Ying-jeou that if I put 个表 individual interpretation of what's one China, put that prior to 92 consensus. In English, we say without the preposition or precondition of the individual interpretation, then we don't have the 92 consensus. And do you, Ma Ying-jeou, agree with this? Ma Ying-jeou said, yes, I can do this. So there's a new kind of brand, so to speak. Sort of. Even to me, it's like not far enough.
Right.
Still deficient. But you think about the struggle for Jiang Qishan in a domestic KMT party, that's an inevitable consequence for him. Okay, but for us, we think about if you want to win the real election, the legislative election or even the presidential election, you have to go way further than that, right? So that's not enough. But anyway, so he survived.
Yeah.
So he gained the support from Ma Ying-jeou, and Ma Ying-jeou did not like Han Kuo-yu. He also gained the support from Zhu Lilun because everybody else do not like Zhu Lilun now.
Eric Chiu, yeah.
Eric Chiu, because
He's
Eric
the
Chiu is
second most popular guy in the
right,
party.
because he's very calculus. I mean, he calculates a lot. Even it's actually excessively that to the point that he sacrificed his own chance in 2016.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
So that's Chiang's. Chiang kind of placed himself in this impossible position, but with the possibility that everybody supports him, and he kind of gained that points, which outsiders don't really, are aware of this, because people look down to KMT, think that he would go to demise sooner or later. But trust me, if you look at a poll, the worst parts, the best version, the worst version, always 25% of the people, no matter how you tease them, you make fun of them, saying that they are old-fashioned, they could be like a zombie in Taiwan's politics, they're still there.
Yeah.
And 25% they will never be gone.
Well,
and even
eventually
though
they will.
they'll be gone by the next generation.
They are pretty old.
They're pretty old, but the next generation will inherit from their ideology. Otherwise, we would not have had people like Wang Binzhong, the young YouTuber that totally for China, right? So that's also the crisis for KMT, is that they still think that no matter what, there's a small segment of population there in support of us. But to me, this is about timing. Sooner or later, somebody will replace you guys. For example, TPP, right? 民众党, led by 柯文哲, because 柯文哲is kind of craving the electoral support space of KMT. Inch by inch, he will eat up those. So you guys cannot stay there and think that you are still in a safe scenario. That's wrong.
Yeah. I think that's a future show for us.
Right.
I'd love to talk about the TPP and all that. So let's move on to who might be running for party chair in August of 2021. So the reason for the date is that there was the last time when Hong Xiuju passed it off to Wu Duanyi, there was some weird conflict over like the party congress and the swearing in ceremony, and so they changed the date for internal logic reasons. They switched it from May 20th to, I forget the date, but it's in August. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about who will be running for party chair in August of 2021. Now, obviously, main candidates that people have been talking about, I think, are Johnny Chiang himself, Eric Chiu, possibly Hou Youyi, Han Guoyu, and Ma Ying-jeou. These are the ones I keep hearing over and over again. Now, my theory on kind of getting back to something you were talking about a moment ago, about why Eric Chiu and Hou Youyi and these guys, I think particularly Eric Chiu, and this is a calculating thing, why he was supportive of Johnny Chiang continuing as party chair is because he knows that the reforms that Johnny Chiang is trying to get through are painful and hard, and he himself is hoping that Johnny Chiang gets those done so that he doesn't take any blame for it himself. That's
right.
my theory.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I agree with you.
So of that list, is there are there any other major candidates that you can think of? Or
well, first of all, President Ma Ying-jeou is out. I mean, like what I said, he's grumpy only if the whole KMT dumping the 92 consensus. If the 92 consensus is still around, no matter in what form, and he's okay with that. So I don't think Ma Ying-jeou is joining the next chairman election.
No, but here's the thing that gives me pause, is he keeps coming out. He's been very high profile recently, and in a way that looks like he's campaigning for something.
I don't think he's campaigning for something.
He just craves public attention, or
that's, first of all, I kind of feel he lost in a sense of power. Kind of, he feel inefficient in controlling something anymore. So he's nervous. He's upset. He's uneasy about this kind of power impotence sort of speaking, right? So that's his thing. And the second thing, I think Ma Ying-jeou still want to continue his legacy in whatever form, as long as there is some kind of politicians, younger one especially, can cling to his brand. He's happy about it.
Right.
So he himself does not need to do something personally, but he can just extend or continue this legacy by letting other people do this, right? So that's my feeling. And practically, Ma Ying-jeou doesn't do things that he has no chance to win. I mean, he's pretty pragmatic as well. I mean, don't ever forget that he will never lose one election in the past.
That's true.
All throughout his political life, he was pretty successful. Okay, so coming back to who is the hopeful candidates, I think Zhu Lilun, Eric Zhu, Han Guoyu. Eventually, I think he will come out, to acknowledge that his qualification for this position. Hou You is a possibility, and I think Hou You, if KMT really ever wants to come back to the ruling power in 2024, Hou You is definitely the only and also the number one candidates, which maybe Jiang Qishan himself might help Hou to win the election. As far as I know, that Jiang Qishan himself is not. First of all, he's too young.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's not young to be 48. Come on, could be a grandfather already, right? But according to KMT's logic, he's still too young, right? But to be fair, he's younger than Tsai Ing-wen, than Su Zhenshang, than those old folks. So he's young, right? So he can wait.
Yeah.
So he can help somebody to win the 2024. And a more practical option is Hou You. And the second kind of option, of course, Eric Zhu.
Yeah.
So Eric Zhu is very ambitious, and sometimes he cannot really conceal his ambition. People can feel that all the time.
He's already set up a policy planning thing. And, he's
so in Eric Zhu's calculation, he think that he might has a chance to support Jiang to win the next chairman election, but then in turn help himself to run the presidential election in 2024.
Hou You would kill him though.
Yeah, that's his calculation. That is his calculation, which I think is too much calculation. That in the end you wins nothing. Yeah, you can better stay at home and just becomes a different person instead of a politician.
All right, I think on that we'll wrap up the program. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me over the show. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll do another show sometime in the future, and I hope everybody learned a lot. I certainly did. And of course, check out report.tw and check us out on Facebook and YouTube for this kind of irregular show, Taiwan Context. And hopefully you'll be back also to listen to Taiwan Report News Brief.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。